Welcome to First Reading. As I'm sure you can tell, we are back with Summer Shorts, which is just a series of brief reflections on the lectionary passages for the week. The first reading text that we have for this Sunday, the fourth Sunday after Pentecost, I have a few. We have 2 Kings 5, 1 through 14, Isaiah 66, 10 through 14, Psalm 30, and then Psalm 66, 1 through 9. I definitely won't be able to touch on everything, but I want to draw out a theme that I believe runs through powerfully in all four passages. The theme of power is what I'm thinking about, especially how power is disrupted and turned upside down on its head. Let's begin with Naaman in 2 Kings chapter 5. Verse 1 tells us that he is a great man of power, high favor with the king of Aram. He's a military guy, impressive record. But the very next sentence in that same verse undercuts all of that greatness by announcing that despite his power, he's got a skin disease, something that made him socially vulnerable, ritually unclean maybe, and possibly even isolated. But perhaps the most interesting part of the story is how his path towards healing began, and especially for me, who gets him on that path. In verse 2, we see that it is not another commander, not even a prophet, not even the king himself, but an unsuspecting young girl, unnamed, was enslaved, was displaced by war. She is the one who speaks the very first word of healing. And later on, we see that Naaman's own servants convince him to listen to the young girl. Now, if we pay attention to the girl's words in verse 2, and later on to the role that his own servants, Naaman's own servants, played in convincing him to listen to this girl, we notice how every major turn in the story bypasses the so-called powerful. Naaman's plight moves towards change by those on the margins. The girl on one hand and Naaman's servants on the other hand. The voices that are quiet, subordinate people who in most societies will not even give a speaking role to. Another important observation here is when Naaman finally meets Elisha in verse 10. He who is great and complicated and is used to complex things felt insulted by how simple the healing instruction was. It looks like he was expecting the prophet to come out and wave his hand and speak impressive words. Then the prophetic magic will happen. But instead, he's told to go do the simple. Just dip in a muddy, unfamous river 7 times. Very simple. Quite anticlimactic, it's very humbling, and yet it is what heals him. So it seems to me as though divine power does not succumb to our human expectations of how power should be used. In fact, as we have seen here in this passage, often divine power crashes what makes us strong and prepares us to receive from the people that we've been conditioned by society to ignore. Now, let me transition briefly to Isaiah 66, where the prophet paints the final picture of God's restorative power. Again, here, the power is not military, it's not like political might or, even Zion marching towards vengeance. And it's none of that. It is rather a mother. It is God appearing as a nursing mother, very tender, nursing, nourishing, sustaining. It's almost unbelievable and unthinkable, scandalous maybe, to even think that the culmination of Isaiah's prophetic tradition, the very last thing that he has to say in all of the 66 chapters that have come before, which began with fiery judgment, rather ends with a scene of divine caregiving, with peace like a river, peace like a river, comfort like a mother's lap. I think this one too is subversive in that it is subversive to our cultural norms and expectations of how power is gained and how power is used. It is so because it teaches us to see that the final word of divine power is not domination, it is consolation. God builds by comforting the brokenhearted. Let me think very briefly on Psalm 30 and then Psalm 66. The psalmist confesses in Psalm 30 verse 6 that they thought that they were unshakable. Right? As for me, verse 6, I thought in my prosperity, or I said in my prosperity that I shall never be moved. My prosperity is everything that I've got. But then crisis came, illness, maybe even grief, maybe a fall from a social position. We don't know exactly, but they were brought low and then later on lifted up. This time, not by their own strength, not by their prosperity, but by God's grace. Similarly, in Psalm 66, we hear the voice of the people who remember what it was like to be tested, right? In verse 10, we see them say that you tested us like silver. You laid burdens on our backs. Again, God brought them out into a spacious and a gracious place after the testing. Points that I'm making here is that the power of God, as we see in these passages, is not performative. It's not what kings and armies and even celebrities of our day think it is. It is healing through humility. It is consolation through tenderness. It is restoration through memory and mercy. So preachers and teachers, I hope that we will let this Sunday be a challenge to our assumptions about what power is and how it's used. If we are preaching to a world obsessed with visibility, that we want to be seen, we want to be heard, a world that is obsessed with status and domination, what does it mean to remind people that God's power is hidden in caregiving, is hidden in listening, is hidden in letting go of our own pride in ourselves and our social positions? In our current post-Pentecost world, where I believe the Spirit is working to build Christ's church, what does it mean to build churches? On hospitality, on healing, on honest testimony. That's what I suppose it is supposed to be. And in our culture where people are still associated with the God who is dramatic in the display of his ability, what if we pointed out instead to a God whose greatest work is done through a child's suggestion, through a servant's word, through a mother's embrace? That's all I've got for you today. I'll see you in the next episode. Happy preaching.